From drone to Jenkins, I mean GitHub Actions, of course, because who would want to migrate to Jenkins? But yeah, a CI/CD Odyssey. And why did I name it Odyssey? Because it was painful, it was long, and nobody really wanted to do it. So unfortunately, there wasn't that much time left, so we had to. And now the reasons. The thing is that at my former company, GWI, we adhered to the rule, you build it, you run it. And I know that this is sort of like a gospel for DevOps, but the issue is that devs didn't really want to deal with it. And I mean, overall pipelines. And as long as it was working, they didn't really have any issues with, just keeping the status quo. And that was all fine until we sort of like scaled, double scaled, triple scaled. And we did have reliable pipelines. Everything was working as expected, but the setup was just outdated and frankly, technical debt. Once it's there, then it's really hard to get rid of. And frankly, it's been there since the company started started building engineering in like 2014, 15. So it really didn't, move into any direction whatsoever. And we were constrained by compute power, and especially the reason is that we have one drone VM with a drone agent, and we needed to scale that VM constantly because, as the engineering was growing, more developers, more pipelines, and of course they were building new ones or building on top of the former ones, which was even worse. And one way or another, we were just reaching the limit, and we were paying approximately, I don't know, £30,000 per year just for the VM, and another £40,000 for the drone license, based on our scale. So obviously, there was a managerial decision that we should do something with that, and the team that should do something with that was DevOps, as always. So that brings me to the second point, and there's a previous setup just to explain how we got there and what was the reason behind it all. We had 60 individual repositories and microservices, quote unquote, in Scala, Go, and Python, plus some micro frontends, which I don't really know how it worked. That wasn't my domain. And of course, as I mentioned, one dedicated VM running all the pipelines, usually 5 to 10 jobs in GitHub Actions syntax per repo. And the deployments were once or twice per week, which is not a lot, but we had a bash script that was basically doing Helm deploy, and it was just a fancy way, non-manual way to do Helm deploy. So it wasn't really that extensive. And otherwise, typical use case, linting, building, testing, artifact offload, just the typical stuff. So nothing too interesting or unique, given that our tech stack was quite an industry standard, I would say, at the time. And we had to choose something, choose a new solution. And given that our code was in GitHub, the first contestant was GitHub Actions. And the reason is, of course, simple. Devs were used to GitHub. So GitHub Actions was just an extension of what they were used to. The syntax was as well familiar with drone. And, we had to perform DevOps, not devs, some cost-benefit analysis and determine how, if it would be even worth it given the cost, which in the end came on par with drone, but it offers much more flexibility, more on that later, and also some timeline. Initially, we set an arbitrary timeline 1 year from when the decision was made, and as you can probably imagine, that didn't pan out. So still, it was a long year effort, and we had to give it some structure. That means getting teams together, explaining what we're going to do and why, and also make people not commit and not do their own stuff when we are migrating, which is, trust me, the hardest thing I've ever done. And yeah, that's one thing. Second, we needed whole engineering on board because, if we just said that it's our team doing that and that it's basically just us, 5 people, we had a DevOps guild, and that guild was sort of all-encompassing. So we were doing everything from infrastructure as code, CI/CD, Kubernetes, and cloud itself. So we needed to sort of push it forwards, but given that it was okayed by management, we started getting people on board and also other team leads. So thankfully, our culture was quite open in this case, and it wasn't ideal, like utopian DevOps culture, but it was working fine. And of course, we did have some direction to move in. Given our situation, it was more than ideal. And yeah, so how to start? You need to build the infrastructure first. That is the hardest first step. So there were some architectural talks, some design talks, how to build it, where to build it, and also we knew one thing, and that is that we don't want a single VM anymore. And I know what you're probably thinking or saying that we could have just migrated from one drone VM to runners in Kubernetes and have some auto-scaling node pools, which would also work, but frankly, the time investment from what we calculated would be more or less the same as a complete migration, and it wouldn't be exactly cheaper. It might be on par with our previous solution, or maybe even slightly more expensive. So, and yeah, we also contemplated getting rid of it altogether and going full GitOps way via Argo CD that we already used, and for some data science jobs. But yeah, this next slide. Of course, it's usable, it's great. I like Argo CD and I like Flux, but the issue is that we would need to build everything from scratch, and we would need to educate people on how to use it properly, how syncing works, and also imagine 60 individual repos. So in 5 people, it would be just too hard to do. And we couldn't rely on other teams because we would need to educate them first. So it's like a cycle that would take much longer than our initial timeline. So yeah, slaying the dragon and going self-managed in Kubernetes. Initially, we thought that we're not gonna go self-managed. We're just gonna use the GitHub runners. But when we saw the cost and the pricing, we quickly realized that if we don't want to go bankrupt in 2 months, then it probably wouldn't work. And yeah, as mentioned, no more single VMs, and we need something that can scale and that is easily flexible both for us and for devs, and also to sort of follow up on best practices. So we decided on 2 auto-scaling node pools, regular and mem optimized, and each pool represented 1 job, because the thing about drone is that there's no concept of jobs. Everything runs in steps, and you can easily reference things as you go through the pipeline. So you can reference, for example, images that you built, or save them locally, reuse them later, and this goes for artifacts as well, maybe even echoing tags or cloning repositories, stuff like that. But unfortunately, this is not possible with GitHub Actions as long as you're running in Kubernetes, or in our case, Docker in Docker, because in that case, pod is short-lived, and it is as long as the job is running. So once it's terminated, then too late, and you need to figure out a way how to either do everything in that 1 job, or not use it at all. And we went the second route, and we realized that devs were using this special strategy of image caching, meaning that there was a volume for the drone VM, and they were dumping everything on the volume, be it artifacts, images, and then they were using it later in the pipelines. And thing is, it was fast, but you have no idea how much the storage cost. Like, we needed to sort of like teach them how to notch it down a bit and how to streamline it and sort of do what's necessary instead of just dumping it all, which didn't even work in GitHub Actions. So that was one of the upsides or unexpected upsides. And yeah, another cool thing is that you can choose labels for your runners. And now, then it's writing jobs based on the self-hosted and the label tag in runs-on, which is really handy, especially if you want to have like two consecutive node pools with different computer resources, so you don't have to scale up and down that often. And at the same time, you have, for example, in our case, Scala and Golang. Golang has minimal footprint, so as you can imagine, it's really basic, and it doesn't require much. But for Scala, we had jobs or pipelines running for 20, 30, 40 minutes, which is not sustainable if we wanted to, if we didn't want to do the same thing we did before, which means having a huge VM and just keep adding resources and scaling vertically. So that's why we had like two different labels, two different runners, and of course we also had some workshops or talks with dev teams on what they should use and how, and what should be the reasoning behind that. So yeah, there was the initial step that we did. Of course, some POCs, testing environments, and mock deployments. And then, when we realized that it's all working fine, we moved on to the migration itself. And yeah, just for the more technical details, we ran GitHub runners in Docker, which means that now they have Kubernetes mode, but back then this was what was available at the time. So this was the sort of native way how to do it. And we also use a native Arc Actions Runner controller, which is open source by GitHub. So there's a huge community behind it, and we knew that there's no point in making our own or relying on some other solution that's not that well known, especially when you need something reliable and something for the long term, because we don't want to migrate again in another 2 years. So yeah, there's that. And the workflow was simple. I would just pick up the GitHub event based on the webhook, check the labels, and then write the jobs accordingly, and create the pods, then terminate them, which we ran into a particular issue, but that's going to be in another section. And now, as mentioned, the migration started, and all hell broke loose. So how did we pull this off, and how did we actually convince devs that they will really, really like it? That was all based on the POC, when we showed them how easy it is to actually just check the tab in GitHub, so they don't have to keep switching between different links, and it's easier for them. They can just commit, open a PR, and directly check their actions. So they really liked it a lot. And also the logging. We received quite a good feedback, and we also calculated costs. And as I said, all in all, it comes down to the same cost, more or less, than as the drone that we had earlier. But it was worth it for the flexibility, and also for longer support. So yeah, now how we tested it and how we actually worked, and what was the day-to-day like for us. If I had to count the engineering hours, it would be in the hundreds, and maybe even 1,000 or two. And the thing is that it was really a monumentally tedious effort, based on the fact that it's really hard to test and increment over it. Because if you want to test the pipeline, how do you do it, right? Like you commit, you see what it does, why it fails, and then you go back to the drawing board and check, fix what's necessary, commit again, until you go mentally insane. And we tried a handy tool, Act, local GitHub Actions, which is quite neat. It works fine for simple jobs, simple workflows. But the issue is when you have multiple pipelines sort of depending on each other, or if you have template that is called, for example, on workflow dispatch, and plus some external authentication, for example, running all this locally is more effort than the testing itself. So we just decided to create a temporary end for testing and for mock deployments. Thankfully, we had our own DevOps cluster that we could easily break, and we were deploying everything there. At one point, we had like 150 different services running there, just based on the results of our testing. And yeah, we split the pipelines into a few functional steps, unit testings, so to speak, and we try to cut down what was necessary and sort of get rid of all the debt instead of just mindlessly rewriting everything for GitHub Actions. We decided to make it more modular and sort of get rid of everything that wasn't 100% needed. And we realized that in the end we ended up with half of the pipelines, and it was just because of composite actions and templates, and also the fact that we didn't have the mess around it. So yeah, from there it was more or less a breeze, and it was routine. Of course, it wasn't easy, and it required oftentimes a cross-team cooperation, which you can imagine that devs couldn't just sit around and wait for us to finish the migration of the repo and then start testing. So there was a lot of communication involved, especially in what we plan to do, which repos, when, how, and who's gonna be involved, because that's actually the issue we ran into, and that is we had 2 duplicate deployments running at the same time in Drone and in GitHub Actions because somebody forgot to delete the Drone CI YAML, and the definition was still there. And you can imagine what it did. Thankfully, we only managed to bring production down twice, which is surprising. But yeah, we definitely learned our lessons from this. Yeah, as I mentioned, the DevOps team was the primary driver of this whole incentive, and we were instructing devs, educating them on what to do and how. But what I'm really glad about and what worked for us is that thanks to our engineering culture, they sort of picked it up, over time, and they started migrating their own repositories. Of course, with our reviews, but it helped tremendously, and it wasn't just relying, on our shoulders, on the shoulders of our team, but they were really proactive, and they even learned how to test it, how to iterate on it, and sort of, fix the errors as they were going through it, which is really great because most devs hate YAML. We hate YAML. Of course, it's a markup language, but the issue is that one indentation wrong, or you need to be exact in the syntax. Because if you mess up, then it can get really ugly. So thankfully, it was all working out, and we were moving at a speed of 1 to 2 repositories per week, approximately, which was faster than expected. And yeah, the only frustration that arose was from the one VM that we previously had. And as I said, you could reference images, tags, whatever you wanted. You could just easily have 5 different pipelines and referencing each other, it was a mess. That's why I said we cut down like 50% of the content, of the definitions, and like, but on the other hand, it taught people how to do things efficiently and sort of properly, instead of just relying on building the image locally, not pushing, and then taking the image again, rebuilding it, and then pushing to the repo. So there was one thing, and yeah, we also realized that using steps exclusively was pointless, because with GitHub Actions, you're sort of like on a crossroad. You can either go full jobs, meaning that you split it into different jobs, meaning different pods that can't easily reference each other, and you would need to create outputs, you would need to add some additional values, or same with secrets, for example. Or you can go with steps, which means that basically the whole pipeline is running in one pod, but that brings insane performance issues and bottlenecks. And we need to find like a middle ground between these two and decide on how to proceed further, because on one hand you want outputs, you want references where it's needed, but you don't want to do it all the time and have half of your code, just outputs and references to each other. So yeah, we were just using common sense, best practices. We even had a workshop from GitHub with one of their guys to discuss some designs, and in the end we sort of decided how to do it properly and moved on from there. And yeah, as I said, using too many jobs, we have bloated pipeline definitions, too many references, and it gets really messy really fast, and it's unreadable. And it's really hard to refactor if you want to add new jobs or new pipelines. So yeah, and the middle ground was actually templates and composite actions. That's one of the main highlights of GitHub Actions, are the composite actions, both from third parties and that you can create your own. It's insanely powerful in a way that, first, the community is really active. So I would say 80% of the use cases are already covered, and you can just reuse the composite actions, supply your own secrets, supply your own values, and that's it for you. And we also created this dedicated repository for our own composite actions, for other devs to use. And they were really proactive in this regard, and they started creating their own for other teams to use. So it was like a chain reaction, and before we knew it, we had like, I don't know, 20, 30 different composite actions for our specific use cases. Oops. For our, for example, for different teams, and it was working really well. So, the composite actions. That's something Drone liked. If you've ever worked with Drone, I don't know, raise your hands if somebody is actively using that. Wow, surprised. Drone CI. From Harness, yeah. Well, I gotta say you're all lucky, but no, it wasn't bad at all. Just the thing that what it lacked was some sort of community support. GitHub is huge, and they open source a lot of stuff. The community is active, but Drone and transitively the Harness company is sort of closed of the world, and nobody knows about them. So if you want to do something, be on your own. And that's one of the main reasons that, if you want to have some sort of DevOps culture, then of course CI/CD is involved. And the Drone syntax was all based on scripts, on commands. So for example, you have 50 lines of different commands, which got really messy. But here it's more modular, I would say. It's just more pleasant to read. Like when you open a pipeline, you immediately know what it is going to do, or how it behaves. And with one keyword, use, then the action ID, and then and then you have the values and secrets, and it's perfectly reusable. Some of them even have outputs by default, so you can very easily reference them. And you can also create your own templates with some placeholder values that you can further distribute, So that's why. So that's really got used to it, and they started building their own stuff, and they sort of took our work from us, which was good. There was one of the steps in the right direction, and yeah, it also allowed them to actually add new pipelines, new jobs, but it was something that we struggled with before. When we wanted to add a new pipeline, it was us who had to do it, because we had sort of the domain knowledge, and it was so unreadable that I remember there were like only 2 people in the company who were responsible for, I think, 10 pipelines that nobody else knew what they actually do or how they behave. So yeah, this was just a breeze for us. And yeah, each dev repo then contained a reusable workflow. That was for the deploy. They had some placeholder values, and the thing is, why we did that, so they can copy from each other. I know it sounds weird, but when we taught them how to copy from each other, just take the template, put it in your own repo, and then create a pipeline using this template, it was much easier than just instructing them how to create everything from scratch. And another thing, they participated in migration, so they learned along the way, and they now knew how to do it. So, less work for us again. And yeah, as I already mentioned, we try to not blindly copy-paste stuff from Drone to GitHub Actions. Of course, the syntax was slightly different. There were some quirks with both of them, but just keep only what's necessary. And yeah, we also use third-party composite actions, which I recommend you always need to check what they actually entail and what they do, because of course GitHub is vetting this really extensively, but depends on your security policies. You don't want to just use third-party actions without any considerations for, especially when it's related to secrets or SSH keys, for example. And now the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what happened afterwards. So we just skip forwards a full year, and now we have basically everything migrated. Everything is fine, but before I proceed, I want to tell you one funny thing. We communicated with Harness, the company behind Drone, the whole time. It was all fine, and we said that by, I think it was 28th of March, we want to discontinue the license. And the license was always like for a full year, and it was ending on this day. And they said, okay, fine, we will do it. You can just easily walk away, and it's fine by us. Well, you can guess what happened. March 28th came, and they were like, you know what? We were mistaken. You accidentally purchased it for another year, so we want your money. And and it was a huge fuck up from our side, because I don't know, this was a question for our lawyers, but somewhere there was either a miscommunication or they had some internal issues, I don't know, but they wanted us to pay for a full year after we had already migrated, which was, well, thankfully, I think there was some managerial decision or some sort of agreement, so they dropped it. But the funny thing is, our company was our biggest client, so I think I understand why. Okay, so the good, massive help from individual dev teams. Like, this was really unexpected, and I would say that just this endeavor sort of improved the culture for many years to come, because thankfully, the amount of communication between the teams, dev teams, and DevOps was like unprecedented. We never talked that much, you know, and but during the migration, we constantly pinged each other on Slack, or we had some syncs. We were together in meetings, in stand-ups, and you know, we didn't know that, but we were actually building the culture as we went. So that's one thing. Also distributing the toil among our teams, not only with the migration, but with further maintenance of the CI/CD and of adding new pipelines, new jobs, or even new solutions. And of course, you know, improve DevX. Truth is, initially they were frustrated with some things, but they came around, and in the end, you know, like a few months after migration, they were telling us that they're glad that we actually went for it. And we saved a lot of money, not on the compute resources. I would say that that stays more or less the same, but definitely on the license and on the support, because we also had to pay for premium support from Harness, and that was, I think, £5,000 per year, which also isn't cheap. And composite actions, amazing thing. Of course, cleanup and sharing the DevOps knowledge. So yeah, this was the good stuff, and we all lived happily ever after, except we didn't. So the bad, some frustrations regarding the jobs. I reiterated this multiple times. They were used to a certain syntax, a certain way of working, and you know, they were used to that for years. And suddenly they had to learn something new. So obviously there was some friction in the beginning. Of course, tedious testing and troubleshooting, which was inevitable. And we also managed to break the GitHub API limit. Don't ask how, but we did, because there's, I think, 1,000 requests per hour per repo. And we somehow, I don't remember who did that, but managed to run like somebody ran the pipeline 500 times before we ran out of resources, and we actually broke the limit. So, and some people also tended to abuse the nature of auto-scaling because they were used to constrained environment, and we didn't need to scale much, and all the resizing had to go through management first. So if we wanted to scale the VM, you know, it had to go higher up the chain, and then we could do that. But with, you know, GitHub Actions, they can run as many pods as they want theoretically. Of course, it depends on the node, because there's a maximum of 110 pods. But we had auto-scaling node pools. We also had labels. So if they wanted, they could just, you know, run the pipeline again and again. But obviously, we started reaching limits very soon, and if we didn't want to make this into a precedent, which means that if you run into some resource limits, then we're just going to add a new node pool. We had to, you know, tell them that this is the maximum you're going to get, and you need to work with it. Like, there's no way around it. So, yeah, still working on that. And Docker in Docker has some quirks. Again, I don't know how about the Kubernetes mode, but we had issues with adding SSH keys, and same with authenticating to Google Cloud. So we needed some dirty hacks in the beginning, and before we, you know, really learned how to do it without the hacks. And now the ugly. It's nothing too brutal or too extreme. We could have handled the migration process a bit better. You know, everybody says that, but there was too much back and forth between teams, and we were running pipelines simultaneously, because how we did the migration, like you create a definition for GitHub Actions for the workflow. And then, for a specific branch, like on push to branch, you tested it, CI now, and if it worked, then you deleted the drone definition, you merged it, and then you switched the branch to main. But we often forgot about it because there was no standardized process, and it resulted in many duplicate pipelines, which is not necessarily an issue. But as I already mentioned, it happened twice for deployment, which messed up some things. And it was salvageable, but still. And of course, very hard to test, especially for the deployment, because we actually asked the devs if they want to deploy for some of their use cases manually. And what GitHub Actions offer is a special trigger. It's workflow dispatch. And it gives you the option to run the pipeline or run the job directly from the UI. And it adds a manual trigger, which is fine. But unfortunately, GitHub doesn't offer this for individual branches. And the only branch is main that can actually utilize this feature. So we had no way to actually test it until it was merged. So that was fun. And nothing too bad happened, thankfully. But yeah, we were really sweating when we were testing the production. And also too much effort going into reusable workflows. Of course, it paid off in the end, but I think that we invested a bit too much time into it during the migration, which sort of hampered our progress up until then, and we need to slow down. And most importantly, there was no standardized process around it. We had no documentation, no sort of step-by-step approach. And it was all based on communication with the other teams, ad hoc solutions. And I think that this was the biggest pitfall, that we should have just created a Confluence page with who to contact, how, when, who's responsible, and make it a bit standardized or corporate, because frankly, it could have been much worse. And I think we were lucky that we had the people and the coworkers that we did, because otherwise it could have been worse. So, and now the question is if you should migrate. Well, that depends on your use case. If you have a small engineering team, there's no point in going self-managed. For startups, for, engineering teams up to 50, 60 people. I don't know if it's worth it because the maintenance around it is huge. And although, the GitHub runners are sort of they don't require that much maintenance. But when they do, it's really, really brutal. For example, when GitHub had an outage 4 times in a row in a month, and the runners weren't picking the webhook, and yeah, so in that case, they weren't terminating the pods, and they weren't even starting new ones. So the jobs were just pending, and they were running indefinitely. And in that case, of course, not being self-managed isn't going to help you if there's an outage. But I'm just saying that for this, you should really have either a dedicated platform team or some devs who really know CI/CD or GitHub Actions for that matter to actually make it work and really use the features that are there. So, yeah. And also, if you are already constrained by your current solution and you know that your company is going to scale, although who knows in this economy, you should go for it. You should migrate when you have less people and more time than, when you have hundreds of people, and then, you need to communicate much more. It's much more effort to organize, and you don't have that much leeway in how you want to do it or how much you can experiment. So yeah, there's nothing right or wrong apart from Jenkins and Bitbucket pipelines. Because nothing against Bitbucket, but well, it's Atlassian. So if you have any questions.
Thank you. I do wonder if in your talk, who is actually the owner who is responsible for the pipelines, your team or the development teams?
Initially it was us, and after migration it was the development teams.
Good.
That's why I actually mentioned that it sort of enhanced the culture.
Yeah, you said that it was unexpected, which to me is shocking because that's the main thing I would expect to come out of this. You know, the way I would do such a migration is I would announce a drone is killed in a year. Here is how we did it for our single repo. Good luck, have fun, see you in a year. And we are here to help.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I think you went through that. And
the unexpected thing was that we didn't know that they would be so, proactive.
Yeah.
That I thought that we need to push them a bit, but in the end they were much more self-sustained in this case.
Yeah, trust them. Developers are actually cool if you talk to them.
You just need to listen, to their concerns. So
thank you.
I have two questions. I would like to start with technical one. I noticed that you use self-managed Kubernetes. My understanding, you migrated from data center to GCP.
No. I should have clarified this. We were running on GCP the whole time, regular in Kubernetes. But what I meant by self-managed was that, initially we had the one big VM, and then we moved into like GitHub runners directly in Kubernetes. Like instead of having an agent on the VM, we went for the runners. So it was more like from one instance to different nodes and Kubernetes.
You use Google Cloud Kubernetes service, right?
Yes, GKE. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then it makes sense. Do you consider using serverless Kubernetes? I think it's available.
We did, but I don't know. Like our team lead didn't buy into it that much, and we also had a lot of specific use cases. For example, we were running Oppa, Atlantis, many other tools, and we weren't sure, how much effort it would be to actually make it all run in serverless Kubernetes. Like, I know that they announced it, but yeah, there was no POC or nothing to go from.
Yeah, I tried 2 years ago, and we had issues with monitoring system because we cannot. It's kind of like should be in daemon, and you should run it in each node, but you don't have nodes, so it was insane.
Yeah, thing is, we like to be hands-on, we like to do it ourselves. Even I know that it goes against the notion that you should minimize toil, but it's fun. So
okay. And second question about business metrics. Did you set a metrics for migration? I understand that kind of like you didn't save on infrastructure, but I guess the purpose of migration was time to market, kind of like that. Can you clarify what metrics you set and which achieve?
Yes, we didn't have set metrics in place, like hard deadlines. We just had a hard deadline that is going to be off in a year, but we had a goal to migrate approximately 10 repositories a month. That was the ideal scenario. To make it work to migrate everything in 6 months, and then you have 6 months to sort of perfect that. But I think we ended up at 6 or 7.
Sorry, I would like to clarify. I think I'm asking not about your performance metrics, but more like from business perspective. Did your developers start producing features faster? Is it your application more stable, more secure, etc.? Is it your infrastructure cheaper for your business? Where you save a cost? how to return money of this migration?
Yes, in this case, there was only one metric in this case that I'm aware of. The rest of, managerial that we didn't have that much insight into, but there was the cost, and we saved quite a lot of money on the license.
Which license? What is the license you pay?
For drone, you had to buy a license for enterprise, and it depended on the scale of the company. So.
And how you save if it is your scale of the company doesn't change? Maybe I'm just noob question.
GitHub was just cheaper. It's simple as that.
GitHub cheaper than Java Enterprise? Sorry, I confused.
No, drone.
There's drone CI technology, which is licensing GitHub Actions technology, which was not the license, but
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like you have GitHub license, GitHub Enterprise, and the same thing was for drone. Like the company behind drone is Harness, so you had like a Harness Enterprise, something like this, and they offered you some support, and also, I don't know, some other, mostly support, but also some of their own runners, their own agents, stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, really quick question. As you are using GitHub Actions now, which is a fully managed service, I was just wondering if you considered the cost of actually fully managed runners from GitHub and like how that compares to GKE, because I cannot imagine it being that much cheaper to self-host, because you don't really self-host
I know what
it.
you mean.
Yeah, so I wonder if you know the numbers. I would be really interested.
Unfortunately, I don't know exact numbers. I was just told that it's cheaper, but that could mean $5 or 5,000, like any on that scale. But the thing is that we also wanted to go self-manage for other reasons, mainly to implement our own caching, image caching, I mean, and for some security enhancement. It was mostly for us, if anything, and also, for scaling, because theoretically we could scale almost to zero, for example, over the holidays, stuff like that. But we had some hard limit that we didn't want to go through. As I mentioned, we didn't want to just keep adding node pools, keep scaling up and up. And so, yeah. But I can imagine that it depends on the company, like how many pipelines you are running, how big the engineering is, and I think you can go from there. But unfortunately, I don't have the exact numbers.
Okay. A quick follow-up that I was maybe missing a little bit, like just the two numbers, like cost before, cost after.
Yeah.
Maybe total, because you said like, this amount of money per year on the server, then the license, then another thing, and I kind of got lost.
Yeah, I understand. We saved £10,000 per year.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
That's a set number. Before they started expanding, so who knows?
Yeah.
But, at the time.
I really hope GitHub Actions is really fast now, because if that's the only result, then it's kind of sad. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Regarding CI/CD pipeline solutions, I started hearing also GitLab, and I am new to DevOps right now, so I am getting familiar with the tools and technologies, and I'm curious whether do you have any take on this?
Don't laugh. I know what you want to do to me. But it depends. Like if you host your code in GitHub, then the action is obvious. If you host it in GitLab, then it's also obvious. Like, different people have different opinions, and I think that GitLab is in some ways really, really better than GitHub Actions. But on the other hand, if all of your code is in GitHub and you have everything in GitHub, and you're already paying for the license, then it doesn't make sense to use GitLab CI. And as I already said, composite actions, that was huge for us, and that's not something that GitLab offers right now. And yeah, so if you use Bitbucket, by all means use Bitbucket pipelines. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question regarding infrastructure side of it. One of the benefits you mentioned, this flexibility for adding or removing node pools. And also you mentioned how you dream to leave developers on their own with those workflows. So I'm wondering if the part of bootstrapping the node pools is also part of GitHub Actions automation, or how you will give them this opportunity to bootstrap new node pools?
Mm-hmm. The bootstrap is done manually, so that's not something easily automatable. Thing is that when they want a new node pool, they would have to go to us. So it's not like in their ownership, but it's not something, you know, that hard that they can do. It's mostly just pulling their some of their, I think it was some of their image, and also running the webhook. So opening some ports, stuff like that. So it's not like that extensive, but yeah, they would still need to go to us. It's not like they can, you know, easily add a new one. And you also need to register them. That's the thing. You need to go to the UI, register new runners, and, you know, in our case, node pools. So.
Got it, thanks.
That's all. So, thanks.
Yeah.